Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the May 2025 session of the Daring to Learn webinar series. My name is Elena Boyd. I am an extension assistant with the UT Center for Profitable Agriculture. You may recognize me from your reminder emails about the series. If this is your first time watching a Daring to Learn webinar, welcome. These sessions are recorded and will be posted to the center's YouTube channel at the conclusion of our session today. I've got a colleague, an extension friend here with us today, Les Humpal. He's going to be talking about transition planning. We will give Les a chance to introduce himself here in just a second. For those of you who are returning to Daring to Learn, or maybe this is your first time and you are looking for TAEP credit, that's the Tennessee Agricultural Enhancement Program, you do have to watch 5 sessions in 2025 and fill out the evaluation survey at the end of this session. We'll have some more information about that towards the end. We'll pop that QR code up for you guys to fill out the session survey. So be on the lookout for that towards the end. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Just some housekeeping things before we get started. If you all have any questions for our participants on the call, you can put those in the chat box, or you can use that Q&A feature. There's an option to raise your hand. If you have a question, we will be able to let you ask that if you need to with your microphone on, or just type those in the chat. So as we move through, feel free to ask questions. And I will go ahead and give Les a chance to introduce himself, and I'll hand it over to him.
All right. Well, thank you, Elena. It's good to be here this morning and appreciate everyone's time to join us. I know it's a busy time of year in May and crops are growing and livestock have to be taken care of. But yeah, my name is Les Humpal and I'm a member of the Center of Farm Management in Knoxville. I'm based in Murray County, but serve about a 13-county area in South Central Tennessee. And the focus about the jobs that we do is to work with producers one-on-one to help them make the best management decisions they can for their operation. Whether it's a full-time farm that's been multi-generation or someone that just purchased 5 acres and are wondering what to do to best utilize their land. We're there to help through the whole steps, whether it's kind of more on the financial side. Everything we do is confidential and there's no cost of our service. Just reach out and be glad to work with you. And, across the state, across the county. So please reach out anytime. We just get on. So this morning, what we wanted to cover is farm transition planning. It's been really a hot topic in the last few years. A lot of that has to do with based on farmland loss that we see here, not only in central Tennessee, but across the state and across the country. Many farm families are kind of struggling to being able to afford or maybe be able to pass that farm to the next generation. And we'll talk about some of the things that we can work with and maybe have an ideas to start that process to make that succession successful. Now, I do want to really point out that it is your farm, it is your life, and you need to make the best decisions for you. So whether that is passing it down to the next generation or just selling the farm at the time that's right and moving on to another adventure or another chapter in your life, that's totally acceptable, but it should be your decisions to make and not relying on someone else to make those decisions. Now with, farmland loss, we work with an organization, I've been very familiar with this organization called American Farmland Trust. It's a nonprofit that was started about 40 years ago in Virginia. And their focus is to work not only with farm families, but working with land to best utilize that. So if it's been land that has been reclaimed, increasing production on it, helping farmers stay on that land through regenerative or best practices, and then also working with those producers that want to transition to the next generation. One thing that they kind of learned from their studies over the last 40 years is that about 40% of American farmland will be transitioned within the next 15 years. Now, not necessarily that it's being sold to a developer or to some corporation, but it's basically meaning that someone else is making that decision for that land. And other work that they've done studies not only in Tennessee, but across the country, looking at the nationally significant agricultural land. So basically the best of the best farmland that they're really focusing on preserving for the long term. That's going to be most vital to our country in feeding our people. And they determined that in Tennessee, around 4.5 million acres falls in that category of nationally significant farmland. As you would suspect, much of that it would be in West Tennessee, where we have more open areas, larger tracts of farmland. Others, it's in northern Tennessee, up in Robertson County, and in those areas, as well as Warren, um, Coffee County, get down to Franklin, Lincoln County, in those areas where they have designated as nationally significant farmland. Of that, they kind of looked at it a little bit further. They looked at, on this map here, they're looking at highly productive land as well as that nationally significant farmland. So you see a lot of that dark green. So this is highly productive farmland. So it'll be row crops, it'll be hay pastures, that type of thing. That really is vital to our ag economy here in the state. So they did a study from 2001 to 2016 looking at that transition, farmland loss. And as you see, the red dots or the red areas indicate over that 15-year period, land that had been transitioned from farmland into other uses, whether that's urban or residential land. And they found that in that time, Tennessee lost about 280,000 acres of that highly productive farmland. Of that, about 211,000 was the nationally significant farmland. And as you can see, it's in the areas that we expect, right around Nashville, Memphis, we get in the Knoxville area, as well as Clarksville and Murfreesboro area, Rutherford County, and how that continues to spread, how continue to lose that farmland in those areas, as well as other areas of the state. They further looked at, and you probably have heard these studies too in the past, where Tennessee is ranked third or fourth in the country of the most threatened states of losing farmland. Texas is number one. A lot of that has to do with just the size of Texas and then on a land, but mainly it's those eastern seaboard country states where it's really has been impacted. We look in Tennessee over that 15-year period, not only the nationally significant or highly productive, but in total about 660,000 acres of farmland have been compromised or developed, going either to that urban, highly developed land, so high impact housing, commercial real estate development, but more significantly, 78% of that farmland lost to that low density residential. And that could mean a number of different things. That could be quarter-acre lots, half-acre lots, or where I live in 1-acre lots. And we kind of think about other things, even if lots are limited to say just 5 acres residential, even though it's not being paved over, it is being removed from available farmland. The Farmland Trust went a step further. They did some different scenarios playing out from 2016 to 2040. So if changes aren't done in Tennessee, we can continue to see farmland loss. And they estimate around additional million acres will be converted, paved or fragmented over the next 20, 25 years. And that's a makeup of about 8% of the Tennessee farmland, which is around 11 million acres. So when we think about that 1 million acres of farmland that may be converted or lost, most of that or half of it anyway will be done on the best farmland, which would make sense. If a developer or people are uh, improving that land, they're going to choose land that is most easily to be worked. Uh, if you have to be busting rock or some more difficult land areas cost more money, having that ideal flat land makes it much easier to use. So the equivalent when we look at what we could expect to lose, we're looking at maybe now these are in 2022 dollars, but 250 million dollars of farm output or 14,000 jobs. Most of that's going to be done in areas that we expect, Sevier, Williamson, Rutherford County. But even if my home county of Murray, we can see that trickling effect from Nashville, how the development has come down into our counties. Now, on the flip side, when we look at, loss of ag land, others will say, well, if you have a 200-acre parcel that gets turned into a factory, that factory can employ hundreds, if not thousands of people, generating tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of economic growth versus a 200-acre farm. And they can see that, but again, this is where producers, lawmakers, elected officials kind of work together to help uh, manage the growth for the next generations to see how we can best utilize that land for the long term. When we look at USDA census data from the NRCS, going back to 1982, we've seen that the country in general has lost 100 million acres of farmland to development, housing, roads, other construction purposes. Now, the good thing about agriculture and what we've done as producers, farmers, and educators and researchers is that we've increased our productivity, not only in crops, but also in livestock. We're producing, say, more meat with fewer animals. Same thing with dairy. We look at all the innovations that are in our that we do on genetics on the crop side, how we continue to push those boundaries of increased production. Now, where that levels off, I don't know, but typically there should be a leveling off purpose. So again, even though we've lost a lot of that land, we are increasing production. Population continues to increase. It's kind of determined of where's that mix going to come into play. A few years ago, government officials, TDA, Farm Bureau has reached out to the Center for Farm Management and asking, the data census, the studies that they've seen, is that correct? The amount of farmland that we are losing in Tennessee. So a project was set up by Dr. Charlie Martinez and the team at the Center for Farm Management, looking at the parcel loss, how much land is converted throughout the state. So they went to county offices, assessor's office, the state controller's office, looking at transfer of properties and how that played off in each county. You can visit our website, the Center for Farm Management, and look at the ag, farm, and forest land loss tab and look up your own counties to see how that played out over the years. I'm just going to pull up an example from Murray County from a period of 2014 to 2023. And you can see on those red dots is land that's been converted from either agriculture, farm, or forestry to other uses, whether that's residential, commercial, or other. And during that time period, you can see that the parcels have been converted. Close to 17,000 parcels have been converted. And that represents almost 11,000 acres of agriculture, farmland that are now in other uses. And in each county, you can kind of pull this up, look at how that plays in your county. Now, again, the information, what you do with it is kind of up to you. If you want to work with county officials, city officials, as far as working on long-term plans, how we can best utilize the good land that we have for the next generation and maybe better manage growth. Again, this is information that is available. If you want more information about it, myself or one of our team members would be gladly to visit with you on that further. Other things, not only farmland laws that kind of strains agriculture, but it also the age of the principal uh, owner of that land or manager of that land. And as you can see over up through 2017, how that curve continues to increase as far as the older producers. Now, the good thing about that is, we are living longer, so our ownership continues to carry further. However, those that are making those decisions are being fewer are joining the ag community, as you can see, through 2017. We look at the average producers, around 59 and a half. Fewer young producers, under 25, under 34. So it begs the question of, who's going to be making those decisions in the long term. Other things that we can see here, some good news from the 2022 census. We show that young producers actually have increased 4% from 2017. So we are seeing new younger producers come on board. I know working with individuals in my counties and across the state, we're seeing many of them kind of coming back to agriculture. Not that they're so much taking over large farms, but they're doing their own production, whether it's a couple acre farmer market garden or more intensive, animal production, but they are returning back and becoming more of those decision makers. Other things to kind of look at as far as new and beginning producers through USD, they considered a new and beginning producers anyone that has been farming less than 10 years. And it's interesting to look at the demographics here as far as age. That's really consistent through all age categories. I know working with individuals as well as within our group settings and workshops, you see a significant amount of people that have been in maybe the corporate world that want to come back to the farm and start their own, kind of get back to the grassroots or, produce their own food for their families. So again, it's not only just young producers age-wise, but it's also those beginning spread across the whole dynamics. So it makes it very interesting to see how that has changed over the years. So when we look at those projections, we talk about over the next decade or next 15 years that 40% of that farmland will transition. It kind of makes sense when you look at that 15-year time frame. Most individuals, they're going to be in their career for maybe 30, 35 years. So when you think about 15 years, that's basically 40% turnover. So it's not only that turnover of the land and assets, but who's going to be making those decisions? Are they prepared to make those decisions in a thoughtful manner to be successful down the road? So not only is, the aging of our landowners a factor, but you think about some other changes that affect ownership and management. You look at U.S. farmland as real estate values. Is it a good investment? Dr. Steve Isaacs with the University of Kentucky went back to 1910 looking at average farmland changes in value. Other than the ag depression that started in about 1920 and ran all the way through the late 30s, farmland has been a very good investment. Not only has farm families benefited from this, but also outside investors. They can see the value of owning farmland. In fact, when you look at, say, Illinois, that north central Illinois area, some great farms, huge flat land, anywhere from 60 to 70% of that farmland is owned by families from Chicago, outside investors. So you can see that's a huge benefit for them as far as making an investment. So it does make it difficult for those that want to be in farming, be competitive with those prices and the values that they're purchasing. Also, some other things that make it a little bit difficult, as far as when we talk about tradition of farming, We do a great job as far as teaching the next generation how to grow crops or raise livestock, but we probably don't do a very good job as far as teaching them the financial management of it, uh, aspect of the business. And oftentimes we think of family farms, but we don't really think about that business aspect of it and the importance of how, if you want to continue on, we have to have a solid business plan and understanding. When we look at businesses in general, including farm businesses, only about 16% of them survive to that third generation. And I can look at my own family history as far as going back great grandparents and grandparents. How each generation has been less interested, so to speak, in farming, and how many of them have transitioned to other families or other ownerships outside the families just because of those facts of maybe not being really involved in those management decisions. Other things that are kind of like a pitfall of farming is um, not knowing those costs of production. Other things too, as far as not very good financial record keeping. I can visit with a farm. They may have some really good production records on their livestock or crops, but not financial record keeping. And vice versa. I've been on farms where they had great financial records, but not very good production records. So it's kind of hard to make decisions that is best for that farm without having both. Other things too that stand out is it's that lack of communication uh, between family members. Maybe the parents aren't sharing enough to that next generation, or the younger people aren't asking those questions. So it becomes difficult when you expressing your goals to and without stepping on someone else's feet, right? You don't want to offend. It makes it kind of difficult. Other things too, as far as deferring taxes uh, or avoiding, someday it's going to be due, and that can have some severe consequences at the time of transfer or selling. Not managing family living expenses, you'll see where we have some really good times in farm uh, the economy currently, on the beef side of it, where we might start to spend a little bit more on family living, but how do we draw back when we don't have those incomes? Other things too, is following your neighbors. Just because they're doing something doesn't mean that they're making money or they're doing the best practices. They may have other resources that are adding to that farm business to make it look maybe more successful than it really is. Other things too, as far as, what's the latest enterprise? In the past, it's been emus, ostriches, uh, late as of late, I think the last one that really came about is, growing hemp. We probably didn't have the best marketing model in place. A lot of people kind of jumped on board without having that done ahead of time or having a good business plan or record keeping in place. But I think behind communication is probably not training that next generation all across all aspects of farming. It's a continual process, right? It's not only about the skills and labor, but it's also about those control of ownership between generations. When you think about a will or transfer of assets, that's kind of the easy part. The more broader part, it's really passing on those skills, making sure that that next generation is part of that decision making, record keeping aspects of the farm operation. So succession planning includes not only transition planning, estate planning, planning for long-term care, retirement planning. We can kind of look at family goals, being able to express that with one another as far as having that in place uh, long term. Sharing labor and responsibilities. Just because you start taking care of the livestock doesn't mean that that should be your sole responsibility for the next 10, 20, 30 years. Uh, reach out for those other responsibilities. Um, all businesses, all careers, there's a time that it comes to an end, but having that exit strategy. again, this should be your decision that you make, not something that kind of comes about that needs to be done or controlled by someone else. Family goals and plans, that's where communication really comes into play. You can have family members that see that farm as an idyllic place to live, tradition, something that they want to hold on for the next generation. And others, family members may see that land and just see that the dollars that it can bring in. And it's hard to argue either way on this. You can think about some of the land prices that we see, not only central Tennessee, but across the state, where it can be a generational changing wealth by having that sale. One of the difficult things I've seen from time to time is where a family, whether it be a mother or father pass away, and there's, three or four children left. One has been farming or in the farm business for a number of years, where the other three siblings or so may live off the farm. When that time comes to kind of split up that property, it becomes difficult for that sole person to buy out the other three if they want to sell. And then ultimately, a lot of times that farm is sold or discontinued. But having some early goals in place and plans in place may help avoid that, whether it's adding life insurance or retirement plans, where maybe those that are living off the farm could have an inheritance, not just relying on the land that's within that farm business. When we talk about goals, I'm sure many of you have seen these different studies, whether it's from Yale, Harvard. This one was from Dr. David Cole from the University of Virginia Tech. You're talking about, 80% of Americans, we don't have goals. 16% of them, have goals in their mind, but never write them down. And 4% of them that do write them down make 9 times more money and are happier with their long-term success in their lives. So we're not only talking about long terms, we also want to make sure we factor in the short-term goals as well, not only for the business, but also for your family, your lifestyle. We want to make sure that within that transition planning, everyone contributes to those goals and part of that communication process. Farm families do struggle, and one of the barriers that kind of place, we think of a farm family business, and we really need to separate those two out. You have your family and you have your farm business, and oftentimes they get commingled, and it's difficult to separate out those roles of the family and then within the business. It's difficult to talk about, you to bring up. You have family members that are living off the farm who probably graduated high school, college, went on to do their own careers, whether it's in St. Louis or Atlanta, and those that have stayed on and worked on the farm. So, their goals, their understanding uh, can be two completely different things, but we shouldn't overlook those that live off the farm because may have also very strong connections that they want to be part of it, maybe later in life. Uh, Even though communication, the barriers are there, we can't overlook that and hope that it goes away. We must address and kind of keep an open mind of everyone contributes and everyone has a say in the matter. One thing I've seen over the years, I have the opportunity to live and work in the Midwest and the northeast part of the U.S., as far as Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New York. But one thing I've seen with farm families that have been really successful over the years is that early start on making that transition. They really welcome back that next generation, the early contributors, relying on their insight to add to the business. When you look at time, if you have 40 years, 50 years to plan, you have many options. But as that time starts to get shorter, the amount of opportunities that you have as far as decision making become fewer and fewer. It may be difficult to reach those goals that you have. So if you wait till you're 70 and 80, it becomes much more difficult than it does when you're 30. So the more time you have, uh, typically the more success you can expect. And keep in mind that even though you have a plan in place, you can always update that as circumstances change. When we look at succession planning adoption, when we look in the US, approximately 70% of adults do not have a will. Now, it's not required to have a will. If you pass away without one, state of Tennessee and many states have uh, stipulations on how assets are developed or divided. But again, you won't have a say in that. We've done our master farm management programs. We started around COVID, like 2020 and 21, and we did surveys as far as how many individuals had a farm transition planning. And during that time, we found that only about 16% of them did. And as we look at the 2022 farm census for Tennessee, we see that assets that are held by farms, this is building, machine, equipment, land, was around $62 billion. And if you think if only 16% had a farm transition plan, you're looking at maybe 45, 50 billion of dollars of assets that really didn't have a plan in place. Yes, they may have had a will, but it didn't really have a place. Think about the value that you had there and how much more equity could be probably derived by having a transition in place, knowing what's going to happen down the road. So when you pass it on to family business, one day it's going to happen. You can pass along the assets, through a will, or if you have a transition plan, you can continue on, away, right, for that next generation to continue the farm practice if that's your goal. Or in the end, if you want to just, sell your assets, move out of state, that's fine, but it should be your decision that you make. So again, start that plan early, add to it, adjust as needed with the best results and the results that you're desired. One of the biggest challenges within that transition planning is really creating that plan and starting. Myself, my colleagues, others will be more than glad to work with a family as far as starting the process. We want to look at, some of the challenges. Can a farm afford the transition? Are we able to take care of the parents as well as add income to the next generation? So those are things that need to be worked at. As always, the first priority should be a retirement income for the parents, making sure that they're comfortable, that their needs are taken care of. We look at things such as lifestyle costs, not only today, but where they're going to be in the future. How about long-term care? If you need to be in a rest home, are there funds available? Now, when we look at farms across the state, when we look at, census data, a great majority, maybe 80, 90% of them have off-farm incomes. So there'll be pension savings, some investments that you'd have along with Social Security to help you through. But again, how much additional do you need to maintain the lifestyle that you have? When we look at things like inflation, up until maybe 5 years ago, it's been fairly flat over a 20-year period, only 2%. But we did have a big increase in 21, in 2022, about 7 and 6.5%. Currently it's probably around 3% inflation, so it has, greatly been reduced. But keep in mind that when something increases 7% one year and 6% the next, it doesn't come back down to zero. It still is inflated, and it is costing so much more to live or make those purchases, say, than 10 years ago. And what will it be in the future? Often we look at long run profitability versus short run. So there are times that you may have some good income as far as currently, with cattle and the beef industry. That'll get you through some difficult times. But what about that long term? You can pay your variable bills, but what about those long term obligations that you have? Also, is it profitable enough to support multiple generations? The picture I shared here is with a family that I've known back in Iowa where they had a hog operation, but the next generation wanted to join. It was on a smaller family farm. So they transitioned to dairy goats. They converted their buildings. They run their own dairy as far as processing some of that into other products, selling as well as selling some wholesale. And they were able to kind of bring that next generation in. So again, making concessions, making different adjustments may be needed to support that family in a transition process. And when we look at family living expenses, this information is from the Illinois Farm Business Management Association. Again, Illinois farms, central Illinois, they're going to be larger than they are for the most part in central and most of Tennessee. But one thing that we've noticed on the chart on the left, the blue bars indicate farm income. So from crops, livestock. And as you can see throughout the years, it changes greatly with commodity prices. The red bars represent the non-farm income that you have, and those are mainly considered steady with a slight increase over time. Now, as far as on the family living side, which is on the chart on the right, you can see in the blue line all the expendables that you had. It doesn't change with the variables as far as farm income. I'm sure you can get by some years, but what about long term? You have changes in a downturn in the farm economy. Does that resort to selling assets, reduce net worth? So again, reining in those family living expenses can be difficult for families as they move forward. So what will it cost to support, or what is family living? Is it $100,000 a year or more or less? Dr. David Cole kind of came up with this concept that couples over 65 in retirement actually require 25% more in living expenses than those compared to 35. And at first, it kind of took me back when I looked at that. I'm thinking a 35-year-old couple, they'll have children, they'll have a mortgage, all those other expenses. But when you think about it, even at age 65, you may not be paying off a home anymore, but you still have insurance on it. You still have taxes. What if something breaks? Those repair costs are still there. Other things too, medical costs. When you leave your employer, you leave your job, uh, you also lose a lot of those benefits as well, as far as medical insurance subsidies. Now you have those costs, travel, right? So when you have a family vacation, who pays for that vacation in the Smokies? It's going to be the grandparents, right? Other things too, such as grandchildren, help them with school or purchasing car or other activities. And we kind of forget about, sometimes adult children have difficulties in their lives where the parents are helping them through times. And when we look at a little math here, we see numbers 164,000 versus 246. So this represents two people having 3 meals a day at a cost of $5 per meal for a year for 15 years, $164,000. Now, if you want to just increase that slightly to $7.50 per meal, you're looking at an increase to 246,000. So just kind of thinking of over a 15-year period, what a small increase in expenses, how that can really impact someone's savings through the years. So getting back to that same kind of topic of will the farm support 2 or more families? This is where long-term planning comes into play. So parents really need to be parents in this case. They're the ones that really need to start the conversation about transition planning. We have to really be considered of reasonable plan based on realistic expectations. Again, coming back to having a sound financial backing, doing balance sheets, income statements, understanding your finances. What are those expectations? Again, it's a difficult subject to tackle, and it can be, very broad sweeping, many different aspects of it. But starting with maybe working with a lender or a financial advisor would be a good catalyst to start the process. You could develop a transition team, and just remember that it's not a one and done. You can update it periodically as circumstances change. So you can get advice from a number of different sources, right? You can reach out to someone like myself with Center Farm Management, ag extension leaders, other things as an attorney. You want to maybe source an attorney that has expertise in estate planning, long-term health care, working with accountant, financial planners, uh, whatever it takes to kind of start that process. There's many great resources out there. Other things, if your family uh, has difficulty starting, there are facilitators, mediators that out there that do this for a living, which may be a good option for you to bring them on board through this process. We also suggest that, getting back to the idea that this is a farm business, that you take it as a business aspect to it, right? So, don't have these decisions at the kitchen table. Don't have them at Christmas time, at a birthday celebration or anniversary. Those are family moments that you want to, cherish and enjoy. This is a business decision, so it should be off-site, whether that's a church meeting room or community center, to sit down and have a formal kind of discussion to start the process. Some of the other tools, we kind of mentioned about the will, but when you're looking at estate planning tools, a power of attorney for your finances. If you aren't able to make those decisions, who can make those for you? The same thing with a healthcare agent or have an advanced care plan as far as medical directives and living wills. We won't get into trust. There's many different type of trust. I know that kind of is a kind of a catchphrase a lot of people want to do and look at, but you really need to be working with a really qualified either estate planning attorney or someone that specializes in them, because there's many different ones out there. Some can be very beneficial for your family. Others may be a hindrance. So again, you want to make sure that you're working with a qualified representative that handles those. Other things too, think about 401k or life insurance. It can be a planning tool as far as with life insurance. If you want to pass the farm on to one child and someone else lives off, and you want to have the same equitable uh, uh, inheritance, life insurance might be an option for that. And think about other things too, disability, long-term care, those type of things all need to be considered within that estate planning tools. You want to involve the family and be prepared. Just because that next generation um, works there doesn't mean they really qualify to be a manager. It takes more than to manage a business than the physical work or the knowledge involved. Um, you want to also, don't protect the next generation from seeing the books or if there's a problem involved. Dr. David Cole speaks all over the country about farm transition planning and economics. And he was giving a presentation in the Midwest, and he had a gentleman in his 90s that came up to him and said, "Well, you think I should show the boys the books?" Well, the boys, his sons, were in their 60s and late 60s, had never seen the books. They always been workers on that farm, even though it's been successful, but they missed out on all that opportunity to learn and know about that business throughout the years by not showing them the books. We want to kind of protect the generation, right? Or kind of keep things within, not getting leaked out. But however, those opportunities that we miss from the next generation being part of it um, doesn't bode well for long-term success. Other things things you want to look at as far as treating siblings or heirs fairly may not always be equitable. You think about the ones that have stayed on the farm and worked. And those that have left to do their own careers elsewhere, do they get equal share of the farm, or should that sibling that has stayed on the farm get a larger share? These are the things that need to be addressed early on and continually to be updated and worked on. As we say, transferring ownership is easier than transferring leadership. Leaders aren't born. They're going to be trained. You think about a lot of farm families; they'll say that, well, when their children graduate from high school or college, they need to go work elsewhere for a few years, get some of that experience, come back to the farm. Others will say, well, they need to go get a job off the farm, work for a few years, get a promotion, then come back to the farm to show that they're ready to go. So again, it's a continuing process that you wanted to share and have both generations or multiple generations working to those goals. Oftentimes, the older generations may be a little bit reluctant to share that responsibility. They want to kind of give up control. Maybe they feel that they're not needed, if they do that. And the younger generation may be reluctant to ask for more responsibility. They don't want to kind of step on the toes of their parents. But you think about that younger generation needs to ask those questions or inform their parents about decisions that they want to make with their lives. I've seen multiple times where people have went off and worked and have their own businesses, but they always had a desire to come back to the farm, and the parents didn't know. So the parents are starting to say wind down the farm operation, and it gets to the point, but the equipment kind of wears out, the fencing, that type of thing, and the younger generation wants to come back, which makes it much more difficult to do that transition. Where early on, the younger generation would express that they could have worked maybe more toward long-term goals where that transition would have been a little bit easier for both parties. Also sharing different tasks, whether it be record keeping, tax preparations, those type of things. I mean, there's a family that kind of known that what they do, they divide up those tasks that are on the farm. Very successful farm operation where they have row crops, cattle, hay, other type of enterprises where each family member takes responsible for a certain area, whether it's buying fertilizer, selling grain, or taking care of the livestock. And each other family member is kind of their assistant. And they have meetings either weekly or monthly discussing what's going on in their areas of the farm operation. And what's very unique is every couple of years they rotate responsibilities. So they each have a good understanding about the entire farm operation. And you think if one member left or someone passed away, that family would be able to kind of weather those difficult times because they do have that knowledge throughout the operation. So when you think about record keeping, if you start doing record keeping, doesn't mean that you're doing it for 30 years. You take on other responsibilities as well, whether you're visiting with lenders, FSA, insurance, making sure you have a kind of well-rounded understanding of that farm operation. We talk about, why transitions fail. A lot of that has to come back to when we talk that farm family business. We kind of kept those mixed together, right? It needs to be your family and your farm business and separating those two out as well. Other things that come up are about, unexpected timely death, marriage, divorce, weather, economy, all those things that are difficult to plan for, but should not be unexpected. Siblings disputes, right? They have different ideas, different goals that they didn't share and they didn't work on, which comes down to the main thing. It's really that failure to communicate. So start early, making sure that everyone's on board on that same page, whether they want to continue the farmer operation, if they want to end it. It should be done with thoughtful process, and it should be your decision on what to do and not relying on someone else or just the economic circumstances that you may be in at that time. Some other additional resources that we have for families to work on that transition process. Through the Center of Farm Management, our Farmland Legacy, we do have a manual, about an 80-page manual that kind of walks through the different steps that you're able to download on a PDF form. We'd be glad to work with you on that individually, or if you wanted to have a workshop in your county or area, please reach out. We'd be glad to work with you as far as getting that set up. The University of Minnesota, Iowa State University, and others also have some really good resources as far as how to start that farmland legacy or that transition process as well. Another great resource is called What My Family Should Know. It's by Ann McKinney, attorney out of the Knoxville area. And basically what this is a kind of a guide or inventory about you. This is where you can kind of update and keep records of your information, whether it's about your job, about your insurances, your retirement plans, uh, your attorneys that you work with or accountants. You have this in one location. So when you do meet with a transition planning or estate attorney, you have all the information that's pertinent. Other things too, you can save a copy of this and maybe give it to one of your children or an attorney and kept in a safe place. So if something did happen, you have all that information available. They can follow through and knowing where your different accounts are and how to work with attorneys or accountants, those type of things. Again, sensitive data, you want to make sure it's secure and unlimited access. But again, a great planning tool. Now, I know when my mother passed away, she had things pretty well in order. However, when you walk into that home, you're trying to find everything. Um, it becomes difficult and takes a lot of time and a lot of additional stress. So, having a manual like this or a resource can go a long way in helping your family through difficult times. So, just some friendly reminders as we kind of finish up here. Uh, think about what knowledge has not been transferred. I think again, my parents have passed away, and there's always questions that I want to ask, and too late. But think about those things that you want to ask or what you want to share with others. And as they say, one of the best things you can do, or one of the greatest gifts you can give to your family, is having things. Don't leave them with a burden of making those decisions. Have those in place. So again, not only are you attaining your goals, but you also are making it much uh, less difficult in those times for your loved ones. Again, communications today, right, is key. And as they say, no time like today to start. Like in horticulture, it says, right, as far as when's the best time to plant an apple tree? It's 5 years ago. The next best time is today. So start. I just want to kind of bring up some of the programs that we work with the Center for Farm Management. Not only do we do our managed program where we work with individual producers, we have our Master Farm Manager program that will be starting online on May 19th. We also have beginning farmer program through Farming Fundamentals as well as some of our tax seminars. But I do want to just focus on that our programs, our focus is working with individual producers to help them best make decisions for their operation, whether they're expanding, contracting, adding new enterprises, eliminating enterprises. We're there to help you walk through the system. So please reach out. It's all confidential, and there's no cost to the producers that we work with. I did want to just bring up one last thing as far as the importance of agriculture and how those next generations can have an impact. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of Dr. Norman Borlaug, but he grew up on a farm just down the road from where I grew up and my parents grew up. He was born around about 1915 on a small farm, about 120 acres, very rural part of the county. Diversified farm at that time, went to a one-room schoolhouse and then went on to high school, college, obtained a PhD in plant pathology. And then in the late 40s, early 50s, the country of Mexico had difficult feeding its population. They weren't able to raise enough wheat to feed the nation. So he went to work for them, developing different strains of wheat that increased production, standability, and Mexico became independent as far as they're able to feed their people. That technology was transferred to Pakistan, India. Dr. Norman Borlaug worked with many of those countries. And through his efforts, he received the Nobel Peace Prize, many other type of awards, and many historians have credited him with saving more lives than any other person in history. They estimate around 1 billion lives were saved because of his efforts from a farm boy in agriculture and the impact that he made. So I want to just kind of leave that with you as far as the importance of agriculture transition planning that we do. Please reach out anytime. I have my contact information, and I think Elena will be sharing your slides with you. So I think let's stop sharing my screen here, and we'll go back to you, Elena.
Sounds great. Awesome. Thank you so much, Les, for that information. And like you mentioned, I will be getting those slides to you guys after this session is over, and of course, our recording will go up on YouTube. Just kind of as we wrap up here, I want to share our QR code for the attendance survey. So I mentioned at the beginning of our session, if you guys were looking to get that TAEP credit, this is how you get that. And I'll leave this up for another minute or two. If you guys that are still with us have any questions for Les, feel free to ask those now. We'll hang out for a minute or two and give you a chance to um, get your survey and ask questions if you have them. And if not, you guys are free to hop off.